Okay, great. Okay, so Professor, maybe we usually start with a very basic question. Can you tell us your name and a little bit about your background and your area of work?
All right, so I'm Jeemol Unni, and I'm a professor at the Ahmedabad University in Ahmedabad. I'm in the management school, the Amrit Modi School of Management. I teach and more than teach, do research in economics. Before this, I was the director of the Institute of Rural Management in Anand, that is IRMA. And I also do a lot of work with the statistics ministry in the government of India. So I've done a lot to sort of try to improve statistics on informal work, women's work, and a lot of the information that you actually get from the labor force surveys today, including the periodic labor force surveys, is also part of what we as a group have been able to enter into the system actually. So at the moment, I'm also a member of the Standing Committee on Economic Statistics of the Government of India, also under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. And I also chair a subcommittee on the labor force surveys, which is the periodic labor force survey and the time use survey. And we're constantly working towards trying to improve our definitions of work and so on, because there's this complaint that women's participation in this recorded is too low, and what could be the reasons for that. So we're constantly working towards doing that. My research is on labor, employment, education, and women entrepreneurship, but everything related to the labor market. Even if I do education, it is to what extent and how people get entry into the labor market and so on. Yeah.
So, can you just tell us a little bit about why we should be studying women entrepreneurship and why that's an important question? Because I have noticed that in a lot of your research, that even the titles of your papers, I think, are kind of very, pointing towards the fact that this is a kind of an understudied or an area that's problematic in some ways in the way that it is studied. So, can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So my interest has always been in small enterprises and micro enterprises, and also on workers who work in this. So basically, it's broadly you can call it the informal sector. So we recently did a book, and the motivation for writing this book on women entrepreneurship in the Indian middle class it has come out just out with Orient Black Swan uh, is because we have international statistics being collected on entrepreneurship under the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, and there it was noted that India ranked among the lowest among the as far as entrepreneurship, innovation, and internationalization of basically exporting and so on. It ranked one of the lowest, and in fact, it ranked in slightly earlier years lower than sub-Saharan Africa. So it has been my consistent belief, which is also part of the motivation for the book, that improving the size, scale, technology, and productivity and small and micro enterprises will boost not just growth, but also the living standards of people in India. And that was the reason why I've been consistently writing on this issue, like you just said. But then we came out with a more, a longer version using macro data, case studies, and so on to understand this whole concept of entrepreneurship.
So, can you tell us a little bit more about the findings in the book and what it is that you have learned about the nature of women's participation in the labor force when they are business owners?
Right. So, one of our another motivation of our doing this book was because in the management literature on entrepreneurship, because mostly it is studied in the management literature and under the a broader, narrower area of strategy. So they look at it as creation of new enterprises, and these new enterprises come because of innovation, looking for an opportunity, and so on. And when we listened to that, we felt that. So I have three co-authors in this book: Vanita Yadav, Ravikiran Naik, and Swati Dutta. So when we looked at this, we felt that that's not really the story about women entrepreneurs in India, and there are various reasons why they take up women entrepreneurship. So in economics, so this is again a multidisciplinary study. Some of our co-authors are management professors, and then some of us are economists. So in the economics literature, Schumpeter is sort of seen as the father of innovation and entrepreneurship. And he felt that he wrote that the key role of innovation by entrepreneurs is the driver of economic change. And he defined an entrepreneur as a person who is willing to convert a new idea or invention into a successful innovation. And so the essence of entrepreneurship is the discovery of new opportunities. So again, it's very similar to the management literature, but then he does define three kinds of entrepreneurship: innovative entrepreneurs, arbitrage entrepreneurs, and need-based entrepreneurs. But then he argues that only the innovative entrepreneurs are the real entrepreneurs. But then in our kind of system, the kind of data that we look at, the kind of people we meet, and particularly the women entrepreneurs using, with very small enterprises, we felt that the third category of need-based entrepreneurship, which arises due to various economic constraints in the society, is also what is more prevalent in the developing countries and particularly in India. So, and the profile of this kind of entrepreneurs is very different from the profile of the kind of innovating, opportunity-looking entrepreneur. But then the management literature did lead us to, after most of them talking about innovation and opportunities, they did talk about necessity entrepreneurs, which are different from the opportunity entrepreneurs. And we thought that this is the need to pursue this idea that economists' definition of an entrepreneur as risk-taking, an innovator looking for an opportunity, or even a psychologist's definition of entrepreneurs as high achievers. That is not quite what it is, and there is this dimension of necessity entrepreneurship, and we do need to look at it. So that's how we sort of came down to thinking in terms of doing this, which was a research project to begin with, and then later on we converted this into a book.
And is there a way to characterize what kind of businesses necessity entrepreneurs engage in? Because I think there's a lot of assumptions also about the kinds of work that women do and what is women's work and what are the kinds of businesses that they run. So if you could take us a little bit through what what these businesses look like.
Yeah, so we added this additional dimension into the women entrepreneurship where we said in the Indian middle class. Now, why do we worry about the Indian middle class? Because there's this thing that the middle class is increasing, and so that's a very good thing, and the poverty and so on is going down, and so then the middle class is really the drivers even of entrepreneurship and of growth as such. So that's a general idea. So we wanted to say that the so-called middle class is not a homogeneous group. It has been growing in India, but it's not a homogeneous group. So that there are various definitions of middle class by different economists and non-economists. But if we choose one which is being used by some authors, particularly Esther Duflo and all of them, they say that the women, the entrepreneur, the middle class is someone who earns something between $2 and $10 a day. Now, so we looked at various sources of data in India to see how this spans out and what proportion of the population is actually there. So, if you look at the poor, it constitutes about 30% of the population. And if you look at the lower middle class, it is the largest, and it consists of nearly 40% of our population. And whereas the middle class is about 16 to 19, and the upper middle class, which is what we normally think of when we say middle class, is between 6 to 10, is between about 10%. And the really rich is anything between 4 and 6%. So we have this huge chunk of middle class, but then they are lower middle class, 40 to 50%. So what do these people actually do? So again, this idea of this, the opportunity and necessity comes up. So if you look at these micro enterprises, they are mostly self-employed people, and even among the self-employed, you can split them into uh, people who actually employ other people, which is an extremely small component, like 2 to 3% of, or maybe 4% of the total self-employed micro enterprises. And then you have own account enterprises. That is, are people who are operating this mainly based on family labor. And then you have this whole category of what contributing family members, but they are also treated as unpaid family workers. So these own account enterprises, obviously, when they are operating with their family labor, the size of that enterprise will be very small in terms of equipment, in terms of the actual capital expenditure, in terms of their scale of business, and so on and so forth. And what we found is that if you look at the kind of work that is being done, the self-employed people, we found that this unpaid contributing family workers is very, very large among women. That means that they are participating in a family enterprise and they're not always the main own account worker. So, but then there was some positive feature that this unpaid contributing family members were going down, and those in becoming self-employed was rising. So at least that was a positive sign. And when we looked at it in terms of class, the kind of activities that the own account workers in poor and lower middle class work, the kind of work they did, was very different from the work of women and other entrepreneurs in the upper middle class. So the upper middle class, including women, could be doing kind of real estate, all the new things that we are seeing today, pet shops and so on. We have a series of case studies on this. We did a series of case studies on these women, and the poorer women could be more home based, doing some kind of manufacturing or service activity, including street food vending and so on, within the confines of their home. So, which means that the scale of operation and the capacity to be able to grow is limited. But at the same time, the positive feature we found was that when we looked at the data, that at least 30% of them we found were expanding. So I'll just take up your next question or tell you more about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think this connects very nicely to the basic question that LEAD is trying to answer, which is to understand what the ecosystem and the other players, how that kind of affects the expansion potential or the success of a business. And so, yeah, you could carry on, or if your research has touched upon some of those relationships and how they factor
Sure.
in, that would be great.
Right. Um, our case studies and also the secondary data. So we used different data sources. We used the informal sector data, enterprise data from the National Sample Survey. Then for the larger enterprises, we used World Bank Enterprise Survey. And then we did a series of case studies. So we basically mixed this micro, macro kind of study. And we also did a survey of students in graduate school, in undergraduates and graduates in Delhi, just to see whether there is an entrepreneurial system building up among the youth. But looking at our case studies, we found that even this upper middle class women, most of them were using their own finances or informal sources of finances rather than and borrowing money from friends and relatives rather than going into the formal system of bank loans and so on. Women entrepreneurs from manufacturing and construction who had basically larger enterprises. They did use bank loans to buy machinery, set up their units, and so on. And we also found a couple of women who actually looked for venture capitalists. But overall, women preferred to stay away from venture capitalist network because they felt that they kind of tended to lose control over their enterprise and also over the core essence of what they want to do. So that's another interesting thing that we have found about. If you look at the literature, also you'll find this. Women entrepreneurs don't necessarily think in terms of only profit or only in terms of scaling up their enterprise. They kind of there are more and more of women enterprises who are either this necessity based variety or they are actually they have a social objective. They have some other reason for doing business rather than just trying to scale up. So you often find that women enterprises don't scale up. That's not their objective function. Their objective function is something else. So, as far as the ecosystem is concerned, we did see that all of these women did say that there was a gender bias in the system, both in the industry, the society, and in the government departments when they approach them to be able to, get help. So, designing women-friendly entrepreneurial system is definitely a very, very important component of the challenge to, get to allow them to take care of this challenge that they face. And the other thing is social. They gave very lot of importance to social support networks, mentors, role models. And in our secondary data also, we found that there are certain behavioral traits that we found to be important. One is the whole idea of risk taking. The other one was of this role models kind of mentoring, and the third one was of I'll get to it. So let's confidence in oneself, right? So as far as risk taking is concerned, we found that the male opportunity entrepreneurs were mostly in the top one third of the middle class, the top of the income design. They tended to display risk taking tendency, whereas the women reported that they feared failure and they were risk averse. But at the same time, they took up entrepreneurship, partly because of their social need to do that, or even due to necessity. And the interesting thing was that 30% of these really small enterprises were expanding their business. The second thing that they felt that all of them spoke about was confidence in themselves. And, and the third thing that women entrepreneurs talked a lot about, even among the college going girls, they talked about the need for a mentor, and that the presence of a mentor was crucial factor. It's helped them to start a business and to grow their business. Part of the reason is that this mentor or this role model, it actually helps them to take care of uncertainties, because there's a whole lot of uncertainty with regard to starting an enterprise, continuing an enterprise, expanding an enterprise. And these mentors are able to sort of help them negotiate that whole thing of. So when it comes to challenges and what we should tell policymakers and so on, I think this mentorship is a really very important thing. And in many fora, I have suggested that we have uh, commerce associations, we have industry associations, and all that, and many of them actually have a women's wing. So, if there is some kind of a formal system where one can set up mentorships and key associate, sort of link the women entrepreneurs with these mentors coming who are slightly uh, well-to-do and better, higher level entrepreneurs, maybe of the upper class and so on. If we can link them, then the chances of these people being able to expand their businesses and continue just remain in the system would improve.
When we did that show earlier this year, we talked to these women who were part of this GIZ program, and they were connected with WeHub. And all of them talked about how important that was to their businesses, And one of the girls we talked to, one of the women rather, she was from IIM. She'd had a fantastic education. She had the network. She was all poised to sort of start this business, but she started a business basically with her mother, selling dried fruit and vegetables, I think, to help
Yeah, it
make.
was dehydrated vegetables because they have a longer shelf life, and she found that there was a big market for particularly sort of local vegetables and local sort of fruit and spices, and so she set up a
So she'd
dehydration
actually
plant.
gone back to her village in Telangana. So I think she
Mm-hmm.
felt a little disconnected because of that
Mm-hmm.
from the kind of her classmates and other people who
Right,
she
right,
knew
right.
from business school. So she was saying there was a little bit of that, but Rehab had been a huge help. So if you
Mm-hmm.
think even somebody with, a pretty,
Education, yeah.
Yeah,
high
yeah.
level education to still say that. And a lot of these things have also resonated with us in our kind of entrepreneurial journey
Right,
in a
right.
way, because we are terribly risk averse and very small, and
Ah,
have been refusing to approach, VCs, or take that route, very much for the same reasons that you mentioned,
right,
because we
right.
don't want to compromise what we're
Exactly. And I
doing.
think, like you said, it's not just for us about scaling the business or,
Correct.
selling it for a, it's much more kind of being able to do the work you want to do. So it does resonate a lot. I think also your point that you said about women not taking loans, that also came up with some of the other women we spoke to, where there was this, they spoke about kind of having like a sense of gatekeeping in some sense, sort of,
Uh-huh.
like in the sense that you don't have your a peer network who you
Mm-hmm.
can share with and say, I went to this bank and got a loan, and you can speak to this manager. And it was kind of those
That's right.
informal networks that they did not have access to, which we don't perhaps think about, that just became a barrier to them accessing credit,
Right.
although there were programs for them possibly.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, Professor, if you can just talk a little bit more about what the necessity and the needs look like, because it's actually very counterintuitive for people. They don't seem to think necessity drives entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship comes with a lot of glamour associated
That's
with
right.
it, right?
That's right.
So I was
Absolutely.
so there's this problem in our minds, we just don't think about it. And like the last 20 years to 30 years has been the entrepreneur has been a kind of a globally revered status based thing that people aspire to be. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that contradiction, or that,
That's right.
the incongruity between the two things.
That's right. So, I mean, that's like I said, that whether it's an economist view or a management view or even a psychologist view, any discipline you take, they visualize this as, like you're saying, a slightly glamorized innovation, looking for entrepreneurs, that it's just driving kind of a force. Whereas if you look at the reality of the situation, people are running enterprises because they have to, almost. So, in that sense, a necessity. But then it's not that all of them are going to collapse. There is a very high possibility of their, moving to a higher level, to becoming more stable and growing their enterprise. I mean, growing means not to the scale of so many millions and all that, but still growing their enterprise. And they would need some little bit of support. So that's why we wanted to focus on this. And it's still, if you look at the overall data on enterprises, it's like 30% of that. The rest of that is actually either they're stagnating or they're declining. That's true. But then if you have some, pay some attention to this 30%. So that's why we have taken this. So we have an entire chapter which talks about these smaller enterprises and what is it that kept these 30% of the enterprises growing. And there we found these three factors. One was use of internet, though even the proportion of people who use the internet was quite small. It was not like the 50% of these were using the internet, but use of an internet, having registered themselves with an authority. So that authority could be, if it is a street vendor, it could be just getting a license. It could be registering with the municipal corporation, and or it could be yeah. So registering with an enterprise was another thing, and there was this third factor. Just get to it. Um, right. Yeah. Oh, right. And the third factor was they had received some kind of a support from the government. So some kind of a support. Mainly in this case, they were saying government, but it could have been a private enterprise itself. So in this digital era, and we really saw this during the pandemic, when people just went off the road. They went out of contact, human to human, selling on a one-to-one basis and all that. So this internet thing was always important, but at this point in time, it's really important. So internet just doesn't mean literacy in using laptops or something like that. It is having that service itself, being able to have internet access. cheap internet access, not have to pay data, pay for that data which becomes too expensive for them to use. The fact of using a smartphone, owning a smartphone which is cheap. So, and then of course setting themselves up in such a way that they can access their customers through the internet. So, internet is extremely an important thing in today's age if you want to grow. And you can see that, all the relatively, in my class definition, if you look at the middle class or the middle class or the upper middle class, many of them have succeeded just doing this, being able to set up their business, showcase their products, and being able to sell or even provide services using the internet. That becomes very important. Government support can be very, very small things. It can include this, internet access for small enterprises at a very, very cheap rate. If BSNL could do that, more towers in areas where these kind of people are operating, and so on. So that kind of government support, and registering with an enterprise, that's registering with an authority, that is something that has to be, people who are talking with and supporting these kind of enterprises should really take this forward as well, because that gives them a real identity, and it gives them what you say, like, if you look at the Self-Employed Women's Association here, the first thing, way before Aadhaar cards and all, what they were doing was just giving them an identity card which says that you are a worker doing agarbatti rolling or garment making or being a street vendor or something. So if they wanted a finance, or if they wanted, even suppliers of raw materials and all that, if they can show them that, we have an identity of this, being this kind of a worker, just proving that they are a worker and they are undertaking this kind of self-employed activity, helps them to grow, to be able to get business, to be able to get inputs at reasonable prices. All of this is what helps these kind of smaller enterprises. And nobody thinks of them. As an economist, if you find that these smaller enterprises are collapsing and only the larger enterprises are surviving, it's considered a good thing, because it means that, the ones that are surviving are the ones which are, are the ones which are keep capacity to grow. They are the real entrepreneurs and all that. And the ones which are not able to do that are, collapsing. So that's considered a good thing. But that's not the way it should be. If you want to use this as a job creation opportunity, you want, so, nowadays you see a lot of the government people coming out and saying, and you see a lot of advertisements like this also, that don't just be a job seeker, be a job giver. How would you be a job giver if you don't if you are not able to grow your enterprise? All these, 80% which are operating only with their family enterprise, they're not job givers. How would they become a job giver unless they get some kind of support? Just these kind of simple things that I'm saying, not giving them 1 million credit or something. If they give them that, they'll probably collapse, because they wouldn't know how to use it, and they would just go into a loan, not being able to repay. They'll go into default, and once they go into default, then they'll never ever get a loan again. So that's not it. Everything has to be went incrementally. Just like learning is incremental, growing an enterprise is also incremental. You don't just move from this size to million size. You see, the ones that we see in the media are those which have actually grown suddenly from nothing, got a huge venture capital funding, and really grew. But that's not what the majority of the enterprises are. Majority of the enterprises are doing this very, 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 very slowly, and they have to be encouraged to be able to do that. And it's just not there in the policy framework. So that's one of our motivations for writing this, or continuously researching this and continuously talking about it and writing about it.
And I was just wondering, in terms of the overall size, do we have an understanding of what the contribution of female-run enterprises is in the kind of bigger scale of things? I mean, what's interesting is that in the last 4 years, even I think since we started looking into this, we've noticed so many projects and so many research, studies going on that are looking at this quite specifically. So we've been quite, because we've been working on shows every year that somehow touch upon this subject. So that's quite interesting that there is. Do you feel that as well?
So, I mean, you're asking a very interesting question. The reason why I started working on this and on the informal sector was because Elaben Bhatt of Seva had come to, so I live in Ahmedabad, had come to our institution. And she wanted to, she asked the director if she could find one of our faculty members to answer or work with them on this question. What is the contribution of the informal sector to the economy? And I thought that was a fascinating question. This is like many years ago, about 20, maybe even 25 years ago. And that is when I started to work with Seva and then build up this whole area. I'm not currently working with them anymore. But so this idea that, and in fact, one of our early studies, what we did was we tried to map the informal sector in Ahmedabad city and try to work out the contribution of these workers in terms of employment and in terms of incomes. So it is there in an early book called Informal Economy Center Stage. So there's one chapter there about Ahmedabad city where we try to sort of estimate this. But like what you're saying, to think in terms of women entrepreneurs, we really need to, it's a very good question, to see what extent the employment size is easy to document. And I'm sure even in our book, somewhere along in those hundreds of tables that we have there, we'll be able to pull out that figure as to what proportion of women are women entrepreneurs in this sense. Of course, using all these various criteria of opportunity, this thing and so on. Even yeah, there would be a chapter there which would explain that. But in terms of what do they contribute to the GDP, what do they contribute in terms of value addition? That's a different story. And to calculate that is a slightly women contribution. You'll get the entire unorganized sector, how much it contributes, you'll be able to get. But to see to what extent women are contributing to it. But it's a very important question because unless and until, why did Ela Ben ask this question? The reason why Ela Ben wanted this question was because the government and the policy makers were not taking them seriously. And anywhere they went, they would ask, that is a small percentage of people. Why should we worry about it? So she needed to show, the whole organization needed to show that this was just not some tiny 1% of people that they were talking about. It was a large proportion of people. And not only their large proportion of people, they actually contributed incomes to the overall GDP. So, similar question if we ask for women entrepreneurs, but then, emphasize that there are women entrepreneurs who are this scaled up, really like every other innovative entrepreneur. And also this set of women entrepreneurs who are, struggling to grow and, make become job creators rather than just having a job for themselves.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of my motivation for asking the question as well, because in a lot of the studies, when you read about women entrepreneurs, it's still a kind of a, how do I put it? It's like they're doing a public service at the end of the day. Look at how
Yes,
many women
yes,
entrepreneurs hire, for
Yeah.
instance, and therefore support them. Or look at how women who are, who are also earners in the family, look at how well their children do. So the
Mm.
justification is never for the women themselves, or it's not a hard justification in terms of money. It's always there's this added social benefit. And so
yeah.
then you're supposed to have like a small, you know,
There's
bleeding
no kind
heart
of like,
kind of
yeah, there's
syndrome
no hardcore kind
associated
of
with
like capitalist, not capitalist, but like hard,
it.
like
Yeah.
just for the business itself, they're running a business
Correct.
well or profitably. They do.
Right.
There's always some larger cause that they're
Yeah.
servicing.
That's true. So yeah, you're right. Business women, business owners should be treated as business owners rather than just some kind of a social thing. You're right, and that's why I'm saying that if we concentrate on those that we think are actually expanding, and then support at least support them, and then give some kind of also supporting the other because you see if you look at the amount of subsidies and other kind of concessions which are being given to large enterprises. It's really huge. It's not that they are all operating without support. They are also operating with support. So okay, GST, don't give it for so long. We give, or when you become an entrepreneur and you are registered in this format, then for so many years you don't have to pay the taxes. So many kind of concessions are given to them, right? So what kind of concession? So it's not that they're operating without concessions, right? Only thing is that we don't see it that way. So we just see it as okay. They are, they've taken venture capital, and that's a great thing. But you see, so these people, they are also being supported, and these people also require support. There's really no very great difference between them. The difference is, the fact that we talk in terms of growing the GDP. So the most important factor that the government is looking at, and comparisons across countries, is at what growth, at what rate is your GDP growing, right? Now, what is the basic reason why they don't? I think that they don't worry so much about the smaller enterprise, because they feel that the larger enterprise, if you talk to, or you manage to give concessions to a smaller set of large enterprises, you get a very large chunk of value addition. Whereas if you want to get that chunk of value addition from the smaller enterprises, then you have to be able to deal with thousands of them. And this is why even the banks step back, because they don't want to deal with thousands of loans. They want to deal with 5, 10 large loans, and then their target is met. So this is credit, but the same thing is true for everything else. So to deal with this group, which is a very very large group, it's a lot more effort. It's a lot more. It takes a lot more management basically than having to manage those 5 firms. Only thing is that if those 5 firms collapse, then the whole financial system can collapse. Whereas out of these 1,000, if 4 or 5 collapse, or even 20% of them collapse, your financial system is not going to collapse. So okay, they have mudra loans. Now what is being emphasized about mudra loans? That most of them are failing. Well, they will fail in a pandemic year, no doubt about it. But it is true that the mudra loans are those loans, very very small loans being given to these kind of smaller entrepreneurs. They will fail in the beginning for a little while, and then afterwards. And of course, this year and last year is not something we should consider at all, because they're exceptional years, and we know that a lot of industries have collapsed. So, what I'm saying is that when we are talking about support, it's not like the support is not being given to. So somebody has to say that also, so that we realize that it's not just a social reason why you're giving support to smaller enterprises. You need it. The economy needs it, because the majority of the jobs are being created in that sector, and not in the large enterprise sector.
Yeah, just today I was reading there was a Elon Musk tweet, of course, like there is
Hmm.
one every day, where
Right.
he's fighting with Bernie Sanders, or he said something very rude to him about him, and people, and because he opposes his politics, of course, but then somebody was pointing out that he got a huge subsidy to start Tesla itself,
Absolutely.
which people are now finally like kind of pointing out. I was wondering,
True.
Professor, do you have any examples of how the three things that you mentioned, which was the internet and
Mhm.
mentorship, and then I forget what the third one was, but do you have any examples of how
Registering.
that registering formalization, right? So
Mhm.
were there any examples that you came across where any one of those things helped kind of circumvent or kind of not have to deal with some other obstacle? And I'll give you an example. I'm not sure if it's the right one, but one of the people that we spoke to was a woman who is starting a medical devices company in India. And she's very educated, very specialized. She's an engineer, and she started the company with her husband. And one of her issues was when she was going around Delhi to these manufacturers to try to get them to produce a specific part.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the manufacturers, the factory owners, wouldn't even look at her. They wouldn't even talk to her because she was a
Mm-hmm.
woman. So
Right.
she hired a man to go and do that part of the work, even though he wasn't qualified to actually have a conversation with the manufacturers, because she was the designer. She's the product designer. So she's the only person who understands the specifications of the part that she wanted.
Mm.
But I was wondering if, in an instance like that, you're able to kind of circumvent having to deal with a certain set of manufacturers who are, discriminating, because you
Yeah.
have access to the internet, for instance, to reach a different set of people, or the opportunities open. I just wondered if there were any examples that came from your work that kind of showed how you had a larger playing field, and therefore your opportunities again expanded, as opposed to were being small, and where you might have been discriminated because of your gender.
gender discrimination and the fact that they're treated differently when they approach even banks, even the educated upper middle class women do say that. There's no doubt about that thing. That. I think that that's an interesting alternative. You're saying that you hire a male, but it's not something that any of us would like. I mean, it's the same is true of academics. I have this thing that I always tell academic couples that don't write any papers with your partner because then everyone thinks that the partner wrote it and you were just a glorified research assistant. So the same thing happens in businesses, where you have a male and a female. I've seen these kind of businesses breaking up also because, or at least separating out because the woman who was really the qualified person and bringing in the funds and so on and so forth gets sidelined in these kind of meetings. So that it's very true, and it happens in government committees. It happens everywhere. I mean, and that's a reality. That's true. Now, I don't know. I don't like saying things like you sensitize the men and you sensitize the bank officers and you sensitize the government officials and things like that. But that is something, like I said, everything happens incrementally here. So because I sometimes get students when I take a class and I'm talking about any of these things. So they say, but how can that happen? I mean, because they just see it within the context in which they're living, and it doesn't seem feasible to them to move out of that system. To move out of that social system, which will allow them to move. So everything moves incrementally. So I would say that even in getting the banks and the bank managers to be able to visualize, to understand this, is still an incremental step that we would need to take. It is definitely a challenge among the many other challenges. But internet, as you're saying, is a little bit more faceless. So to that extent, you can go into an internet option and then you are not quite sure who is the owner of that enterprise and so on. But I don't know to what extent expansion in terms of getting loans and things like that works just through this internet system. But getting clients, getting customers, and so on, definitely it is. It's a face. It's more faceless than the thing. But of course, now they do say that you can get bank loans through internet banking and things like that. I really don't know. I've not really spoken to anybody who ever got a bank loan in that fashion. So, yeah, it is a
I
constraint.
think I was trying to understand just from the point of view of the LEAD study itself, which is trying to see whether these businesses' outcomes are being impaired by the fact that there are gender discriminations at every stage, which obviously the answer is yes, but I think they're trying to demonstrate it and then show, are there strategies that these businesses are using to kind of circumvent or to sort of deal with it. And so this was a very interesting, compelling example that the woman shared with us about her
Mm-hmm.
business and how she was dealing with it. And she's in a very male-dominated environment, so
Mm-hmm.
certainly not doing something that is women's work, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that was quite an interesting. So I just wondered if there was a way to maybe extrapolate on what has worked to see if that those also reveal strategies for women to that are being employed. Of course, I'm sure women are using strategies every day. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there are strategies we don't visualize as strategies because it's negotiating your everyday, right? It's putting your foot down at some point, at every point, not just one. So that's there. But yeah, we have interviewed women. We have cases of women who have, an electric car, started an electric car, started some kind of a genome sequencing system. We do have, of course, there are other things like pet shops and things like that, which was not the now it has become very popular, but when this lady started it, people were like, what the hell are you doing? I mean, whoever gets, I mean, pets just eat leftover food. But then it has become a phenomenon now. Even medical stores and general stores are selling pet food, cat food and dog food and things like that. So the strategies that were employed, it like I said, in the beginning, it's always a no. I mean, Everywhere it's a no. And then it's a question of getting some mentorship. Of course, helps a lot. All of them say that support, and sometimes they say that the mentorship is not necessarily from what I was telling you. The commerce, chamber of commerce, and things like that. Sometimes it is within their own homes or within their immediate circuit that they get the support and somebody who stands up for them and so on. But to say, I can't think of a general way in which to make sure that all women are able to get this kind of thing. But one thing that you still have to keep telling people is that you just have to stand up for what if you want to do something, you just have to stand up for it. There's no other way. Yeah, and girls do negotiate. Anybody who has gone through an education system would have negotiated her way through that education system to be able to, get into a formal system and to be able to do that. Most people have had to negotiate it.
That's a really good point. Even the woman we talked to, Kanika, said that as well. She said her
Mm,
parents were not happy with her starting a business, even though she was studying a very specialized thing. So there
I think
was a
one of the other women we are going to be interviewing is a woman she's a service provider to the government. So she has a fabric making unit. So she's a designer herself, and she worked in the Middle East, and she came back. But her real bulk of her work, of kind of her income, comes from being sort of a large scale service provider and they make bags or something for the government. And so one of the challenges that she was talking about was just being in this. One is, of course, in a very, of course, a male dominated area, but also there's a very strong power hierarchy between,
mm,
you as a vendor and the government. And I
mm,
think for her, managing on a day to day basis, managing, profit and loss, and having her cash flow was something that that she found very challenging. But we are going to be interviewing her. But one of the things that does come across, she's very, like you said, you have to be a very strong person,
mm.
and not let anyone say no to you,
Right.
because they just give you the runaround. The other example that I remember was when we were working on the WeHub project. Was we did interview. There was a woman from Assam who worked in the hospitality industry, but she was a restaurant owner, so she was very much. She wasn't sort of like, working on the food side of it. She was actually running the whole business. And one of the
Mm,
things that was her peer network, because although it wasn't in the same state, she had other friends in neighboring states, I think she said, not working in the same restaurant business, but in sort of associated business. And she said that really helped her sort of work through the day to day kind of problem solving. I have to get this part. What do I do? How do I get through this
mhm,
hiring issue? And that
mhm.
is somewhat, sometimes, she said, invaluable support that you can get, not even from, like sometimes mentors they'll give you broad mentoring,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
what you need is like someone who'll answer the phone when who'll just help you and say, what do I do now? I'm stuck,
Right.
and help you work through that. And she said even though they were not necessarily in the same state, just having someone the same geography just really helped.
Yeah. So, we talk a lot about entrepreneurship training, and this entrepreneurship training has become a big thing. So, there's an entrepreneurship training institute here, EDI, and then they do entrepreneurship training. But colleges have also started doing, creating the entrepreneurial spirit, is what we say. I mean, we call it. So, some kind of courses on entrepreneurship at the undergraduate level, some kind of people coming in and talking about their business and how they went about doing it and so on. Of course, a lot of them, the real facts are hidden. Sometimes you are only talking about your successes. How you manage that success sometimes doesn't quite come out. But all of this helps actually. I still do think, and the girls in the colleges that we interviewed, they also felt that basically we found that colleges which had training programs in entrepreneurship or courses in entrepreneurship, even in a so like we run a BBA program, but there are entrepreneurship courses being run here. So even that kind of thing helps to increase the number of people who are saying, students who are saying that over time they would like to become entrepreneurs, that kind of thing. So that some kind of it has to come from very young age. Only then you can even visualize being an entrepreneur. And there are people who have got got up to the topmost level, and then at some point, when they need to scale to move to the next level, they are unable to do that. They're not able to get the funding, and then they sort of have to sell their business and so on. That happens. But then at the same time, you have people who are serial entrepreneurs. They set up one business after the other, and so on. Uh, but yes, training is important.
Do you have any final thoughts or any final comments about this work? We'll keep in touch with you and let you know how it goes and let you know when it's out. And please do listen to our other show, Professor. We'll send you the link.
Sure.
So it might be useful, maybe even for one of your students or something like that. So we'll
Yeah,
send that
yeah,
over
sure,
to you.
sure.
We have actually some of our podcasts have been used as course material. So
Yeah,
because there's a lot.
definitely. Hmm.
So we usually I think we've spent almost an hour. So usually before we wrap, we just ask if there's anything that you'd like to say that we didn't ask you about, or anything specific to the topic we're discussing that you'd like to share before we end.
Yeah, so I mean, the broad thing is, of course, to have some kind of a enabling strategy. And even though I didn't talk about it, the social reproduction role of women cannot be, put away. I mean, in our given system of the patriarchal way in which we are operating, we can't say that it doesn't exist, and the women entrepreneurs are managing that in some fashion or the other. So that provision for childcare, old age care, and so on has to also be part of the public policy that goes towards trying to build up a better business environment for women entrepreneurs. Networking is another thing. If people can be brought together, just like you said, that people, she or whoever that entrepreneur was able to get support from somebody from the other state who was doing similar stuff. So that kind of some kind of a networking within the industry group or within the area in which they are doing, so in which they are operating, is an absolutely essential part of it. And now that we are on this internet thing, of course, we still have this problem that everybody doesn't have internet and etc. etc. Because me being me and the kind of work that I do, I can't forget about this group of people who might not have access to a lot of things that we are talking about. But given this kind of internet facilities and so on, if some kind of smaller groups are created where the networking possibilities, otherwise, where do you network? There's no forum where you are meeting anybody else, or you are able to talk to anybody else. It just doesn't exist. So I have seen, we did, there was a talk. I mean, I was chairing a program in the fintech thing, which they do it yearly in Singapore. This was online. So I did come across, I interviewed three or four women in that panel, where there was this, exactly what I was suggesting was there, in the sense that the Chamber of Commerce of that particular locality did this kind of mentoring of women entrepreneurs. At which scale and which this thing we'll still have to sort of take a look at. So it exists in some states, and I think that they were talking about Andhra Pradesh or Telangana. So these kind of things are absolutely essential if we want. They just have to be able to talk to somebody, see other cases, and figure out how to take the next step. Particularly when they're starting. Why starting? Even 5 years down the line, at every when you want to move from one level to another level, it becomes extremely essential. So I think networking and support is extremely important. After that, you can talk in terms of credit and all the other physical things that are required. Supplies, the supply chain has to be there, and the inputs at prices which are affordable, etc. All of that is very important. But some kind of a support network to be able to help startup and to stay in the business, which is just as difficult as startup. Right?
Thank you so much, Professor. This has been great. So we'll be in
Great.
touch with you and let you know when this is out.